Hello everyone, Bones McGee here, and if you've been a fan of the channel for a while, or you've just seen my older Stereotypes videos for Sea of Thieves, then you know that the Ori franchise is one that is near and dear to my heart. I absolutely adore both these games, and I credit them for being the first games to push me to tears with their storytelling. If you want to call me a little bitch for that, then I'll have you know I played through Red Dead Redemption 2 about a month after beating both Ori games, and I cried at the ending of that game too. And if you don't cry at the end of Red Dead Redemption 2, then you must be some kind of soulless bastard. Anyway, both Ori games are amazing, but a lot of people in the Ori community, as well as the gaming community in general, are somewhat torn between which one is actually better than the other. Some people prefer Blind Forest, while others proclaim Will of the Wisps as the superior Ori game, usually judging both from a simple gameplay perspective or fun factor or whatever. I, however, strongly believe that Blind Forest is by far the superior game, and I am ready to die on this hill. No one can convince me otherwise, and hopefully I can convince you too, because I'll be explaining why I believe Blind Forest is leagues better, in depth, as well as discussing why, in my opinion, Will of the Wisps falls short to its predecessor. Without further ado, let's dive into the mystical world of the Ori games. Before I can begin to compare each game, I'd like to explain the story of each as quickly as possible to provide context for the viewer before I discuss why each one is good or falls short. As the disclaimer at the start said, this video is heavy in spoilers, and I would recommend you click off and play both of these amazing games before continuing. The story of Ori and the Blind Forest begins one fateful night in an enchanted forest known as Nibble. We see through a raging storm that a small glowing leaf is pulled from a tree by the wind and slowly flutters to the ground, passing by a seemingly overweight humanoid creature. This creature is Naru, and after seeing this glowing leaf flutter by in the storm, decides to investigate. She follows until the leaf gently rests upon a rock and witnesses Ori's birth. She takes the young Ori into her arms and adopts him as her own. She watches Ori grow, and they work together to overcome life's various obstacles, like building a crude bridge to reach more fruit. One fateful night, however, Ori returns to witness the very same tree he was born from, the Spirit Tree, emitting glorious blue waves of light, like a beacon in the night sky. Naru sees this too, and scoops him up, running into their cave, Swallow's Nest, to take shelter. After that night, we see the forest inexplicably begin to die. The once fertile trees now bear no fruit, and slowly the grass and plants begin to die off. Ori finds some fruit on an almost dead tree, but when he returns, he finds his adoptive mother has succumbed to starvation, leading him to leave Swallow's Nest after a brief period of mourning. Unfortunately, Ori soon begins to succumb as well, weak from malnutrition and injured from a thistle bush. He draws his final breath and dies, but thankfully, the Spirit Tree is within sight, and using the last of its energy, brings him back from the dead. Ori explores the forest and quickly finds a small floating orb, which awakens from his touch, and introduces itself as Sane, the light and eyes of the Spirit Tree. Sane guides Ori to the roots of the Spirit Tree, where we learn from the perspective of the spirits what happened the night the forest began to die. The waves emitting from the tree that night were from the light ceremony, and were intended to guide Ori home, as the spirits believed him to have been lost in the storm the night he was born. But a giant owl named Kuro attacks the ceremony seemingly unprovoked, removing Sane from the Spirit Tree and casting her away into the forest. Sane explains that to prevent Nibble from decaying and being destroyed, Ori must restore balance to the three elements of water, wind, and warmth, and return Sane to the Spirit Tree. Ori sets off on their quest. On their way to find the first element, water, they run into a strange spider-like denizen named Gumo, a creature who can be seen stalking Ori in a few spots earlier on. He steals the water vein, the key to enter the Genzo tree, which controls and cleans Nibble's water. Gumo initially steals the water vein, but returns it to Ori after Ori saves him from a rock slide. Ori then clears the Genzo tree of corruption, and escapes its flooding waters only to be attacked by Kuro at the top. Ori is knocked off and seemingly captured by Kuro, only for it to be revealed that Gumo managed to snag Ori during his free fall, returning the favor to Ori after he saved his life. Ori then goes on to clear the next two elements. After acquiring one of Kuro's feathers, traversing the mind-bending misty woods, and retrieving the Gumon seal, Ori enters the Forlorn Ruins, the original home of Gumo and the Gumon. Gumo, now the last Gumon left, enters the ruins for himself as Ori restores the element, and after a narrow escape from the ruins finds Kuro's nest, where her side of the story that fateful night is revealed. The massive amount of spirit light, which is implied earlier to be dangerous to non-spirits when Naru scooped Ori up that night and took shelter, unintentionally killed Kuro's owlets, leaving only one unhatched egg left. This sent Kuro into a blind rage, and in an effort to protect her last possible child, attacked the ceremony. Sane, upon discovering this, expresses remorse for her owlets, but urges Ori to continue on. Ori then acquires the Sunstone and goes on to Mount Horu to prevent its eruption. During Ori's trials within the volcano, Gumo takes the light vessel from the Forlorn Ruins and uses it to resurrect Naru. Naru and Gumo set out to find Ori, Naru's only wish to see her child again. After the final element warmth is restored in the volcano, Kuro attacks Ori and Sane as the fire from Horu spreads. Naru, who had been separated from Gumo, arrives to protect Ori from Kuro, and upon seeing this, Kuro softens, remembering the pain of losing her children. As the fire spreads and is about to reach her remaining egg, Kuro takes Sane back to the spirit tree, which emits a flash of bright light that dissipates the fire and restores the forest, but Kuro is destroyed by the light, sacrificing herself to save the forest. Ori is revived and watches as new spirits are born in the field in front of the spirit tree, while Naru and Gumo watch from afar. They return inside Swallow's nest to see Kuro's egg has been moved inside, just in time to see it begin to hatch. Now, I apologize if these story synopsis segments are rather long, but I want to give as much context as possible while keeping them as short as possible, so I have to take one for the team somewhere in there. In my humble opinion, the story of Blind Forest is about as perfect as it could possibly be. It might have a few flaws, but it's a beautiful story about love, family, and the importance of balance. Ori's goal is set straight from the beginning, with clear stepping stones marking significant progress in his effort to restore the forest. It has a compelling, lovable antagonist who is presented initially as heartless, but is then revealed to be more caring than they let on. I personally love how the initial event that kicks the story into motion is presented from multiple points of view that are revealed as the story goes on. First Ori's or his lack of it, then the spirits, then Kuro's. It's a great device for initially giving the player motivation to stop the antagonist, only for them to feel and understand the reasons why they did what they did, and eventually cheer them on when they take on the mantle of the hero. Kuro wasn't a wrathful being by nature, she just was protecting her child, her last child, from beings she thought were dangerous. The spirits didn't even know that they were hurting her children with the light ceremony, shown by Sane's immediate sorrow and remorse after learning the fate of her owlets. The spirits never intended to hurt anything with the light ceremony, they just wanted Ori to come home. Calling back to the multiple points of view the game shows us to help convey the story, these and the overall story are shown through a show-don't-tell style of narrative storytelling, where the events are shown to the player and the player is meant to piece together the story simply from the visuals given, with the spirit tree giving minimal commentary at specific times. This, combined with only a small handful of important characters, provides a story that resonates with sheer tone and atmosphere, and with minimal narrative clutter. This also makes the times when the story does explicitly tell you through text all the more impactful. My favorite moments like this, personally, are the many ancestral trees throughout the game that give Ori his new abilities. When you find one, Sane provides a small explanation of the spirit who died there, and I feel like that's a great touch. It gives the world much more life and gives each new ability a deep meaning. Like, Ori isn't just getting this ability, he's learning it from another spirit who went on the same journey as him to save the forest and yet fell in their attempt. These things combine to make a gorgeous story that's easy to follow, yet is emotionally impactful and deeply immersive despite its simplicity. With all my talk of the story, you'd think I was talking about a movie, but I think it's high time I discuss the actual game aspect of Ori and the Blind Forest. One might be quick, given its general gameplay loop, to group it in the coveted Metroidvania featuring small white creature protagonist category, which it technically does belong to, along with Rain World and Hollow Knight. However, after playing through Ori and the Blind Forest twice and 100%ing my second save file, I firmly believe that Blind Forest isn't entirely just a Metroidvania. While it does feature the ability to backtrack to old areas with new abilities to reach new areas, this is used almost exclusively for acquiring secrets like ability cells, energy cells, and spirit-like containers. There are only 3 instances where you technically backtrack to advance the story. Going from the Ginzo Tree to the Sunken Glades to Misty Woods, going back up to the Misty Woods after the Forlorn Ruins to get the Sunstone through Sorrow Pass, and back through the Sunken Glades again on the way to Mount Horu. But these required backtracks are very minimal compared to a typical Metroidvania, where in those games a lot of areas required for progression might have entrances in the starting zone that require abilities acquired much later in the game to enter, meaning backtracking is 100% integral to the gameplay loop. Ori and the Blind Forest mainly focuses on platforming, as many abilities Ori has are movement-oriented and very few deal direct damage to enemies. Speaking of damage, the game does have combat, but it's extremely simple. Outside of the few previously mentioned abilities, Ori primarily defends himself using Sane, who casts homing attacks that automatically target nearby enemies. This allows the player to focus more on their precision platforming when dealing with enemies, rather than having to dedicate themselves to aim and target individuals. You can kill enemies simply by mashing left mouse button, or whatever button you have it bound to on a controller. And yes, I've beaten this game twice with mouse and keyboard. I'm sorry, but I just prefer it to a controller nowadays. Anyway, long story short, Ori is a platformer first and a Metroidvania second, with a minimal focus on combat. In the words of core programmer David Clark, having Sane lock onto the enemies and shoot the flames worked nicely because it made this nice separation. Ori is trying to run from everything, Sane is doing the attacking. In fact, especially later in the game, enemies serve less as threats and more as semi-risky movement options once Ori gets the Bash ability. Think of Bash kind of like V1's feedback or arm, but you can use it to propel yourself in the opposite direction you parry in. This minimal focus on combat allows the player to focus more on traversal and exploration, immersing you in the game's world in an almost poetic fashion. It keeps the gameplay simple and focused. Speaking of abilities, the game gives the player each ability at a slow pace, usually with an entire area for them to practice it with. This slow drip of new abilities gives the player time to savor each new gameplay mechanic, while the provided areas immediately demonstrate the many uses of the ability and make each one feel useful. Even the ones that aren't required to beat the game that were added in the Definitive Edition are still useful for movement mechanics or directly affect movement entirely. Combine this simple gameplay immersion with a masterful soundtrack by the very talented Gareth Coker, with tracks that fit perfectly like a missing puzzle piece to almost every moment in the game, and you've got a perfect, relaxing, yet still challenging and fun experience that almost never grows old. In fact, I credit Gareth for getting me to try these games in the first place, as I absolutely loved his work on the Ark Survival Evolved soundtrack and its respective DLCs. Ori and the Blind Forest establishes what an Ori game should be. Of course, I can't mention Blind Forest without its saving mechanic, the Soul Link. Essentially, the game allows you to save on command at almost any point in the game, kind of like a quick save in most other games, but at the cost of spirit energy. This creates a sort of strategic tension, especially extremely early on in the game when Ori can only use Soul Link once before needing to collect more energy. Overall, Soul Link gives players the agency to control the stakes and pacing of the game. Soul Link also gives access to the ability tree, where you can spend earned ability points to unlock passive skills like increased spirit flame damage, automatically getting pickups regardless of distance, breathing underwater, and revealing secret areas, just to name a few. I mentioned the ability tree now since it's going to be important later when I discuss Will of the Wisps. I'd like to quickly mention that a lot of the names for characters in this game have meanings too, which I think is a really neat detail. Ori is a unisex Hebrew given name meaning my light, Sane is a German verb for to be, Naru is Japanese for to be of use or to bear fruit, Gumo is Japanese for spider, a variation of Kumo as a result of rendaku, a Japanese phonological process where the initial consonant of the second word in a compound word becomes voiced, and Kuro is black in Japanese. One reason I think this is cool is because for the most part these names' meanings directly tie in with the characters that bear said names. Just like the ability tree, this is also important later, so bear with me please. Finally, I'd like to talk about the art style for Ori and the Blind Forest. Its 2D rendered visuals are astoundingly gorgeous, looking like something almost straight out of a Studio Ghibli movie. Every bit of this game is eye candy. It manages not only to look gorgeous, but still convey what happened to the forest since the cataclysm that caused it to go blind. Some areas, while pretty, still show signs of decay, like leafless trees, and earlier on in the game, dirty, brackish water that hurts Ori. The greatest thing about this game style is that it's timeless. It's a form of art and it won't grow outdated. Even in the year 2062, when we have haptic suits and can practically live inside video games if we wanted to, with the most realistic graphics possible, we can still go back to Ori and the Blind Forest and it will still look amazing. Immersive yet simple gameplay with a gorgeous soundtrack, beautiful visuals, and a touching, powerful story. These three things come together like the Triforce to form Ori and the Blind Forest. Speaking of Triforces, you can find one etched into a tree in Thornfelt Swamp in the game, along with more references to other games, which I think is pretty cool. However, I think it's time I discussed the sequel. An emotionally powerful story with an amazing soundtrack, a new lovable character with a new location to explore, and new mechanics to enhance gameplay. These were the ingredients for the perfect Ori sequel, until Professor Utonium accidentally added a secret ingredient, a bullshit anchor plot, and the abandonment of established unique mechanics, and more. Thus, Ori and the Will of the Wisps is born. The funny little Powerpuff Girls parody I just did is going to make a hell of a lot more sense once I give a synopsis of the sequel, and without further ado, let's begin with that. Ori and the Will of the Wisps begins shortly after Blind Forest left off. Ori returns to Swallow's Nest to witness Kuro's last owlet hatch. Ori, Naru, and Gumo collectively decide to name her Ku, and they raise her as their own, feeding her and watching her grow. Unfortunately, Ku was born with a damaged wing, a little bit of Nemo syndrome if you will, so she can't fly. Gumo quickly finds a fix and attaches Kuro's feather to Ku's wing, which allows her to fly. Ori joins her on their first flight as they soar through various landmarks of Nibble, and after flying for a bit they get caught up in a storm, and the violent winds rip the feather off of Ku, stripping her of her ability to fly and throwing them into a freefall. They both land in a new forest called Niwen. Ori's search for Ku eventually leads them to Quolok, a giant toad looking over the Inkwater Marsh and some of the inhabitants of Niwen, the Moki, whom Ori meets earlier. He tells Ori that Ku is in the Silent Woods, the site of a former Moki village, now a desolate wasteland and owl graveyard as a result of the decay, but with the waters of Niwen unclean, it isn't possible for Ori to reach the Silent Woods. Ori must first set the wheels of the Wellspring, a giant water wheel that purified Niwen's water, back into motion to clean the waters and continue on. Quolok also gives Ori a wisp, the voice of the forest, to guide them on their journey. Meanwhile, Naru and Gumo see Niwen over a vantage point, and figuring that might be where Ori and Ku went, head off to Niwen via a raft to find them. After setting the Wellspring's wheels back into motion, a large hostile creature born of the decay called the Stink Spirit, whose body jamming the wheels resulted in the Wellspring's failure, attacks Ori, but he narrowly escapes. After clearing the waters, Ori enters the Silent Woods and reunites with Ku, but the pair encounter Shriek in their attempt to leave, a vicious owl deformed by the decay who was an orphan at birth and rejected by the rest of her kind, ruling over the Silent Woods and terrorizing Niwen. Shriek attacks Ori and Ku attempts to defend him, but is struck by Shriek like one might brush a bug from their arm. Ori escapes with his life, but finds Ku in a comatose state. After Ori mourns Ku's condition, Quolok explains that the Voice of the Forest is not at full power and cannot bring Ku back in its current state. Due to the Spirit Willow's prior passing, the light that it carried was shattered into 5 wisps that scattered across Niwen, leaving the forest vulnerable to corruption and decay that killed the Willow's spirit guardians and Shriek's parents before her birth. Quolok tasks Ori with seeking the other wisps of the Spirit Willow's light, the memory, eyes, strength, and heart in the forest, and merge the 4 with the voice to form the tree's light. Quolok leaves his march to help Ori with locating one of the other wisps in a location called the Luma Pools, but his body is forcibly taken over by the Stink Spirit from earlier. Ori breaks the creature's control over Quolok, allowing for him to kill it, but their fight leaves Quolok mortally wounded. Before dying, Quolok pleads to Ori to restore and protect Niwen in his place. Eventually, Ori finds the remaining wisps from Luma Pools, Moldwood Depths, Windswept Wastes, and Bar's Reach. During this time, we learn of Shriek's story and why she hates everything, and merges them together to form Seer, the Golden Light. Ori and Seer head to the Spirit Willow, and Seer revives it. However, the tree tells Ori that its time has passed and can no longer carry Seer, asking Ori to merge with the light and restore Newen, though Ori would have to leave their previous light behind. With that, the Spirit Willow dies for good, and Seer is returned to Ori, but before Ori has a chance to merge with it, Shriek appears and attacks them. Ori defeats Shriek in a climactic battle, who turns to the Silent Woods to die in the wings of her parents' corpses. Ori finally merges with Seer, becoming a spirit tree, healing Newen and reviving Ku with her damaged wing restored in the process, which Naru and Gumo arrive in time to witness. Ku, Naru, and Gumo find where Ori and Seer merged and discover his spirit tree beginning to grow there. They help the tree flourish and continue their life as family together, and as it is revealed that it was the new spirit tree that was narrating the story and was Ori all along, retelling the events leading up to when it merged with Seer. Eventually, the tree completely grows, and life begins anew as a new spirit guardian falls from it. Now, before I dive deep into my criticisms of Ori and the Will of the Wisps, I'd like to preface by saying that just because I believe it's inferior to Ori and the Blind Forest, doesn't mean that Ori and the Will of the Wisps is a bad game. It most certainly isn't. In fact, I think it's one of the best games I've ever played, it just has some flaws that make it inferior to its predecessor. Think of it how Fallout 4 is an awesome game, but not a great Fallout game. Will of the Wisps is a great game, but not a great Ori game. That comparison is going to make a whole lot more sense once I delve deeper. Speaking of which, let's just do that right now. First of all, I'd like to take a moment and give a few things I really like about the game. For starters, I think that the combat, while simplistic, is pretty fun. Of course, the music is amazing, composed by the returning Gareth Coker as it rightfully should be. I also enjoy the look of its graphics, being 3D models rendered on multi-layered foregrounds and backgrounds. I, of course, don't like it as much as the predecessor's purely 2D art style, and I will go more into depth about that in a minute. The quest system I also felt was kind of fun, encouraging you to explore more, especially with the item quest, where you gotta exchange items between multiple NPCs across the map. It also leads to a few memorable moments outside the main story that I think are a nice touch. Lastly, I enjoyed the ending to this game, which is a bit of a controversial topic among fans of this franchise, considering that if we ever get a third installment, we won't be playing as Ori in it. Maybe he'll be born again, and every spirit tree from Nibble came from the same spirit reincarnated multiple times. Wishful thinking, I know, but as for why I liked the ending, I felt it was powerful in how caring and altruistic Ori really is, to give up his former life in Nibble and pretty much everything he knows to save a land he isn't even from. You could argue that his primary motive for agreeing to become the new spirit tree of Newen was to save Ku, but either way, he still saved the forest in the process. I will say, however, I don't think the ending is super earned, because up until the very end, there isn't any sort of foreshadowing or explanation that Ori may have to, or is destined to become, the new spirit tree for Newen. Seer just kind of throws it onto him after the fight with Shriek, while Ori is weak and probably not thinking super straight, and is just like, come on, bro. Just do it, bro. It's not that bad, bro.
I feel it. I feel the fumes coming out of it, bro.
It's not that bad. It's not that bad. Just do it, bro. Just do it, bro.
Well, this is not bad.
Styling, bro. Just
To top off my thoughts on the ending, I also like that the spirit tree giving narration throughout the game wasn't the one from Nibble we saved in the first game, but Ori himself as a spirit tree, recounting the events that happened prior to his quote-unquote ascension. I just thought that was a really cool and neat detail. Now with my criticisms. The first of my criticisms is the general gameplay loop of Will of the Wisps as compared to Blind Forest. Blind Forest is, like I mentioned earlier, a platformer first and a Metroidvania second. Will of the Wisps, with its reworked method of attacking, its shard system, that I must add is very similar to Hollow Knight, and general combat focus, as well as a heavier focus on backtracking, caused the platforming aspect that made the first game so iconic to falter. The platforming in Will of the Wisps, while still having some difficult parts, is overall easier than its prequel, especially with Ori being much stronger at the start of this game than the previous one, and that instant death hazards are much rarer. In fact, the whole game I consider easier by a wide margin. I've only played through Blind Forest twice, but my record for least deaths across both my runs is about 100 or so deaths by the end of the game, and that's on the second run where I know pretty much everything that's going to happen. but I can beat Will-o'-the-Wisps with as little as 25 deaths, with my second run, currently ongoing, only having 2 deaths so far, and I'm already about a third through the game. To put it simply, Will-o'-the-Wisps, unlike Blind Forest, which is focused on platforming with everything else being minor, tried to do a sort of trifecta between a combat game, a platformer game, and an exploration Metroidvania, but somewhat faltered on all fronts. A jack of all trades and a master of none. Combat, despite feeling entirely reworked, still feels simple and can get a tad repetitive. Platforming, as mentioned earlier, took a pretty big hit, and while backtracking and general exploration are more focused on here, they don't feel as rewarding to me. The game has a few non-essential areas where you can get bonuses like new shards to use, or extra life and energy cells, or even one of 2 permanent 25% buffs to your damage that do stack with each other, which is nice. The reason why it feels less rewarding to me is simply because, like mentioned earlier, Ori is a lot stronger in this game than the prequel. In Blind Forest, every life cell and energy cell I got made me feel a bit more confident in myself, that I could better tackle the challenges ahead. In Will-o'-the-Wisps, though, it's more like, wow, yay, I can take a few more hits, or wow, I can use an ability in extra time. I'm not trying to deny that these are helpful, but they certainly aren't as impactful. Not to mention, Will-o'-the-Wisps practically throws abilities at you. Compared to Blind Forest, where acquiring all the abilities was spaced out and allowed you to adapt to each new location at the proper pace and enjoy each new power, in Will-o'-the-Wisps, however, you get practically your entire arsenal of abilities back, plus a few extra new ones, before what I consider the first act of the game to be even finished. It's quite a lot to process, especially if you mistakenly play this game first instead of Blind Forest, which is a mistake a lot of people make if you can believe it or not. Non-numbered sequels surely are a breeding ground for unintentional spoilers. My final and most important critique of the gameplay is something I mentioned in the Powerpuff Girls intro parody, and yes, I told you it would be relevant. I'm a man of my word. Will-o'-the-Wisps outright removes or drastically changes core mechanics from the first game. Soul Link, not here. Spirit Light, now it's a currency instead of an XP system. Ability Tree, replaced with shards and purchasing abilities. When I was talking about Blind Forest, I mentioned the Ability Tree had an ability to let you pick things up like health, energy, and other pickups automatically from any distance. That's in Will-o'-the-Wisps too, but instead of a perk that's permanently active once unlocked, it's instead a shard that only functions when equipped and even then has to be upgraded to achieve the same functionality. Seems like a downgrade, doesn't it? And the water breathing ability, that is in Will-o'-the-Wisps too, but on my first playthrough I never found it. Why? Because like I said, you have to buy your abilities now, and not in an easily accessible ability tree that I can look through at any time. No, I gotta buy it from an NPC who's only in one part of the map. Of course, this makes fast traveling a lot more useful, but it absolutely sucks for convenience. Like I said, I never found this in my first playthrough, but that's not just because it wasn't in a convenient tree, but because the NPC who sells it, Ofer, advertises himself as a weapons expert. Why would I ever think to look for an ability to breathe underwater from a weapons expert in any other game where this is a thing? In fact, this guy sells every ability that isn't a shard, in addition to various weapons. Thinking logically, it should be sold by the guy who sells shards, and I can't remember his name for the life of me, but this is the one ability that is situational enough that it should have been a shard, and wasn't necessary to be on all the time. What were they thinking? Speaking of the weapons in this game, there's 9 total if you include offensive abilities. Spirit Edge, Spirit Arc, Spirit Smash, Spike, Spirit Star, Light Burst, Blaze, Flash, and Sentry, with most of these able to be bought from the previously mentioned NPC and others earned through progression, but they aren't necessary to be effective in combat. Of course, you don't expect every game to be Ultra Kill, where all the weapons have different uses and are viable against different scenarios, but there isn't a single combat situation in this game where you can't get away with just using Spirit Edge, Spirit Smash, and Spirit Arc. In fact, to beat the game, you don't need to buy any of these. There's literally an achievement for completing the game without spending Spirit Light, and Spirit Edge you get for free from an ancestral tree. And speaking of ancestral trees, no more does each one come with a story of the spirit that died there. No longer are they unique moments of storytelling. Instead, they just serve to give you abilities and nothing more. Of course, from this point in Ori's overall story, this kind of makes sense. Sane isn't here to give commentary on them, and the wisps you find, as well as Seer, don't have any comment on the ones you find after acquiring them, which is disappointing to me. It was so cool hearing about the past spirits that Ori got his abilities from, but I suppose that's just not something they thought was important. Now I would like to discuss the story of Will of the Wisps in depth, which is probably my biggest problem with the game, starting with Ku. Now, I want to make it clear that I don't have a problem with Ku as a character. I think she's great. I love the sibling dynamic she has with Ori. What I do have a problem with is how the plot treats her is what I can only describe as a narrative punching bag, or better yet, a carrot on a stick to simply lead the plot forward. Compared to Blind Forest, where the overarching goal of saving the spirit tree and the forest by extension is presented clearly and immediately, with clear stepping stones to mark our progress towards the forest's salvation, Will of the Wisps' plot is a lot more obscured and jumps from one issue to the next on a whim, like we're being led around by a dollar on a string. I feel like we as players don't get enough time with Ku to properly empathize with her as a character. The game establishes that Ku and Ori love each other very much as essentially siblings, but I feel like we as players don't get the opportunity to really feel the same sort of emotional connection, and that's mostly due to the plot itself. The most screen time we get with Ku is the intro sequence. After Ku and Ori crash land in Newen, Ku basically gets no screen time to develop as she's lost in the Silent Woods. She's given to us and practically ripped away in the span of less than 10 minutes. Ori finally does get to reunite with her near the end of the first act, and we only maybe get 10 to 15 more minutes of her before she gets knocked out of the story again. She gets put into a coma for the remainder of the entire game, and doesn't get any more representation in the plot until we beat it and get the final cutscene. I feel like this is a major injustice to what would have been a really emotional and lovable character. Remember when I mentioned a bullshit anchor plot earlier? Ku has an essential role in this as well. If Ku hadn't been knocked into a coma and she and Ori escaped the Silent Woods, then they could meet up with Naru and Gumo, head home, and the story would be over. In fact, this anchor role is the biggest plot hole in the entire game. What exactly is stopping Ori now that Ku is in a coma, yet still right next to him, for waiting for Naru and Gumo to arrive and taking Ku and Ori back to Nibble for the spirit tree there to heal her? You can argue that moving someone in a coma is incredibly dangerous and should only be done when absolutely necessary, which I would answer she already has been moved. She was knocked into a coma in the Silent Woods and carried to her resting spot in Quilloc's Hollow by Ori, who was assisted by some Moki. This was a situation where it was necessary, as Ku would have died if she was left there, but the Silent Woods are incredibly dangerous to traverse anyhow, and if she was able to be carried safely out of an area that is heavily decayed and dangerous to almost all forms of life, then I think it would be safe to move her in a non-decayed area to a raft. Seriously, if Ori had pulled a Luigi and sat and did nothing instead of going to find all the wisps, the situation would have resolved itself with half the effort. If you ask me, a way better reason for Ori to stay and try to save Nibble was when Quilloc pleaded in his final moments after Ori killed the Stink Spirit for him to watch over Newen, as he may be the only one left who can. And I feel this because Quilloc was endlessly helpful in Ori's quest to find Ku. He gave us a ton of help to someone who's basically a stranger to him. Quilloc's a great guy, and I grew to like him a lot as a character, which is why I feel his plea is so much better a reason than just, Ku's in a coma, guess I gotta save the forest again. I also want to mention that I didn't know she was in a coma until doing research and freshening up my knowledge of the games to write the script for this video. The game does not make it immediately clear that she's in a coma. In fact, after Ori finds her seemingly lifeless body at the end of the Silent Woods segment, the game hard cuts to what visually looks like a fucking funeral. For the longest time, I thought she actually died. In fact, when I first saw this playing Will of the Wisps for the first time, the hard funeral cut, and call me morbid if you want, almost made me laugh from how sudden it was. We just got Ku back, and now she's been killed that quickly. I imagine that Moon Studios didn't intend for me to literally almost laugh at this scene, but that was my blind first reaction. Long story short, I feel like Ku is probably one of the most poorly treated characters in a game I've played, narratively speaking. Her use as a figurative character on a stick for the plot to move forward is nothing short of sad to me. I also want to talk about Shriek for a moment. As mentioned earlier, she's the big bad owl for this game, like Kura was for the prequel, but she's about as deep as a puddle as characters go. She was born after the Spirit Willow died and her parents succumbed to the decay, and she was deformed by it. The other owls of Newen shunned her, likely for good reason considering she was deformed by the thing that kills everything else in the forest, and because of that she just wants to kill everything. Kuro was great because once her motives became clear, she was a much more tragic character, and the player could genuinely understand why she seemingly hated spirits and empathized with her. yet knew her hatred was misguided, and in the end she sees that and ends up saving the day. Outside of the orphan story, it's difficult to empathize with Shriek, at least for me, because all of her rage and anger is a result of other owls trying to protect their own from the rampant decay, which she mistook as hatred of her rather than the hatred of the thing that deformed her, and so she just attacks everything. And in the end, instead of accepting the kindness and company Ori offered in her final moments, ran away to die alone. That's like if a human was an asymptomatic carrier for Ebola hemorrhagic fever, and because nobody wants to catch Ebola from them, they want to kill everything. And when one guy in a hazmat suit is like, hey, wanna be friends? They yell, fuck no, and go hide in a corner. And as antagonists go, instead of being this big overarching threat to the main goal like Kuro was, Shriek just feels like an ambient annoyance that occasionally rears its ugly head, but goes away eventually if avoided. The only reason she attacked Ori in the end and Ori was forced to defeat her wasn't because she was afraid of spirits or trying to protect something like Kuro, but for the same reason she attacks everything else. She just hates everything. For these reasons, I find the plot of Will-O-the-Wisp to be very thin compared to its predecessor. With the aforementioned plot hole and a lack of a truly compelling antagonist, it falls short of Blind Forest, and the whole thing, if I may feel so bold, is a series of increasingly unfortunate events that lead to something that could have been entirely avoided. As an additional note, I wanted to see if any names in Will-O-the-Wisps had meanings like that in the previous game, and I discovered something interesting. Seer is a Hebrew name like Ori. It has a meaning, and what I could find, and feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but the name Seer has several meanings, including hairy, he-goat, demon, tempest, and horrors. It comes from the root word she'ir, and forgive me if I butchered that pronunciation, which expresses intense negative emotion and the experience of violence. That's quite a far cry from Sane's to be, and if it's intentional, that makes you think. What if Seer isn't actually good? Just a thought, really, but interesting nonetheless. When I critique things, I like to be constructive. As without the constructive part, criticism isn't criticism, it's just destructive and only serves to tear down and belittle. Instead of saying, this is stupid, you could say, this doesn't quite make sense. I would like to change these things to maybe make it a bit better. And I'm going to do exactly that. So here's the ways I would change Will-O-the-Wisps to make it better, in terms of both story and gameplay. Starting off, I'd change Shriek entirely. Instead of just being deformed by the decay, make her a being truly born of it. A living catalyst of it, and everything she touches begins to decay. Make it so her rage is born of the never-ending pain of being such a catalyst brings. Kinda like an anti-Midas, if you will. Everything beautiful Shriek ever loved has decayed at her touch, and the pain that brings her fills her with this frustration of loss. Her aggressiveness both out of that uncontrollable pain-fueled rage, but also a territorial instinct to keep things out of places she considers her territory, so they don't suffer the same fate as everything else. It would support her denial of the love of others, as she would believe that if anyone loved her, the decay would just take them away, like everyone and everything else she ever cared for. To still support her being the final boss of the game, the Spirit Willow is a place she considers part of that decayed territory, and dealing with her is not only part of the risk of restoring the Willow, or at least attempting to, but also a necessary end. Make it so that the decay she spreads is fueled by her life force. As long as she is alive, no amount of spirit energy can stop it, only delay it. On top of that, make it so bringing Seer back is a necessary part of defeating her. Only an extremely strong source of spirit light can quell the decay inside of her enough to make her vulnerable. Otherwise, the decay pretty much makes her immortal and unable to die, so she may continue to fuel it. Next, I'd make it so that when we reunite with Ku and she gets struck by Shriek, instead of just getting knocked into a coma, Ku is conscious, but now she's infected with that decay, and it's slowly going to kill her unless Ori kills Shriek and restores Nguyen's light. Transporting her to Nibble with Shriek still alive risks decaying everything Ori worked so hard to restore in the previous game, because as established earlier, Shriek's decay is virulent and cannot be completely stopped as long as she is alive. As Ori works to find all the Wisps, Ku's condition will gradually worsen until, when Shriek is finally put down, she's too far decayed to make it back to Nibble before she decays away entirely. Have the game make us check in on her between each wisp, so that the player can see her interact with Ori more, and better establish her as a character for us to connect with and feel emotionally attached to. This would completely eliminate the plot hole from earlier. We can't take her back to Nibble at all with Shriek alive, and the time it would take to eliminate Shriek would be too long to make taking her to Nibble to save her still viable. In addition, when we finally defeat Shriek, instead of her running away like a bitch and dying from her injuries alone, when Ori extends his kindness despite all she has done to harm him and Ku, she collapses and begins to cry, apologizing for everything she did, and thanking him for finally ending her misery as a catalyst of decay. As she finally experiences the comfort of a loved one, she passes away peacefully next to Ori, crumbling into dust soon after. With Shriek out of the way, but Ku's condition critical, Ori then fuses with Seer and becomes the new spirit tree, healing her just as Naru and Gumo arrive to witness it, and the ending can continue as it does in the game currently. However, if you don't like the ending, I feel multiple endings could be added, either based directly on player choice at the end, or depending on what they accomplished in the run. Perhaps if you beat the game as fast as possible, to get to the end with no side quests finished, Ori has no emotional connection to Niwen or its people, and instead of fusing with Seer, chooses to leave with Naru and Gumo and take Ku back to Nibble to be healed there. Ku is revived and they return to Swallow's Nest, but Ori can't sleep and heads back outside to gaze Niwen one last time as the Spirit Willow collapses entirely in the distance, and as he watches, maybe he thinks he could have done something more to save it. Maybe with an average completion run, he makes a deal to bring back another spirit from Nibble to fuse with Seer, and it plays out mostly like the first ending, but has Ori return with the spirit, and the spirit and Seer fuse, becoming the new spirit tree. Ori effectively stays in the forest and returns to his normal life. And finally, the 100% completion ending is how the ending is currently, with Ori sacrificing himself to save Niwen. We could call these three endings the abandoned ending, the savior ending, and the true savior ending, respectively. These are just ideas, and if you have any more ideas for endings, don't be afraid to comment them down below. To fix the gameplay, for starters, I'd bring back the ability tree. Keep the new weapons with Ophir, but the abilities he sells should be part of an ability tree that can be accessed at any time from the menus. As for combat, I'd make it so that most weapons are more or less effective against specific enemies or in specific situations to reward the player with better use of their arsenal. This is kind of already used, but only against like beetle enemy types that have armor that you can't break except with a certain attack. Maybe to better reward full arsenal use, perhaps a hidden style system, kind of like Ultra Kill, but much less in your face. It could be used awarding Ori a Spirit Light multiplier for performing specific combos or defeating enemies more effectively. I would also re-add Soul Link, but make it serve a different purpose. Instead of acting like a quick save and replacing autosaves, make it sort of a totem of undying. You anchor your soul to a specific point in time for a cost of Spirit Light, and if you die, you're restored to that point in time, maybe with some cool time rewind effect, allowing you to approach a specific part of a combat situation differently without having to restart it entirely. Finally, we can keep shards the way they are for the most part, but make them strictly combat bonus oriented. Any one of them that is more of a general utility should be moved to the aforementioned ability tree. That way, we still get a cool idea of making builds, while keeping everything that's for convenience easy to use without disrupting the same build dynamic. As a final extra, I wanted to hear from the Ori community what they thought of Will of the Wisps and see what they thought. So I made a Reddit post on r/Ori in the Blind Forest to see what everyone over there thought, and I'd like to read and respond to a few of them. Think of this as a sort of community brainstorm or something like that. Anyway, let's get started with our first reply. The story's ending felt rushed and contrived. There were 1,000 ways to end the game, but they chose the easiest path and the most cliché. Personally, I think the ending is fine, but I will agree that it is rushed quite a bit. Like I said earlier, the game doesn't really properly build up to it, and because of that, I feel it doesn't fit super well, but I don't really think it's that bad. The story overall, I will agree, felt rushed. Since everything happens so seemingly fast, there's no build-up really to each event. It's just one smack in the face after the other. The only thing I disliked in the game was the ending, as most do. Really didn't like that. It's a bad ending no matter how you look at it. If there were multiple endings based on how much you've done, or what quests you did, or choices you made, it would have been amazing as a bad ending to avoid. Like I said, I don't mind the ending. If the story built up to it better, then it would be fine, but like I mentioned earlier, I think the idea of multiple endings is really cool, and would have added more depth to the game and impacted player choices. This one here is really long, and the English here is a tad broken. No offense to original poster, obviously. So I'm not gonna read it aloud for time's sake and sanity's sake, but I will say that they make some really great points here. They mention the ancestral trees, like I mentioned earlier, as such are an amazing piece of environmental storytelling that made Nibble feel alive, which is unfortunately gone in the sequel. The original post also mentions Sane's reactions to the various events post-Cataclysm, which is also absent in the sequel for the most part. I'll take the time to mention this now. The Wisps and Seer feel so emotionless, as unlike Sane, they only react to the area Ori is in to be like, oh, this area is really decayed, it's dangerous. They feel so flat compared to Sane, who expresses sadness over the dead Gumon and remorse over the death of Kura's owlets. Meanwhile, the Wisps are like, yeah, this is a location, and this is what happened in it, I suppose. And the final part I'd like to highlight is original posts mentioning of how each character in Blind Forest gets their own moment to shine in the game's narrative, thanks to the small handful of characters actually present, compared to Will-O-The-Wisp, which has so many more individuals that all contribute pretty much nothing, save for a small select few. And by small, I mean small, like 3 or 5. Blind Forest does what it does so well because it has so few characters. It allows the narrative to focus on these characters and make them each important and impactful, and all memorable. I remember every character in Blind Forest vividly, and I can even rattle off most of the ancestral trees by name, like Soul and Tatsu. But do you remember the Moki in Moldwood Depths that needed a lantern? Unless you just met the guy, probably not. There's not much need to justify. You're already right that Blind Forest is just better. I thank you for the reaffirmation in my beliefs, but I still want to show others why I think this way. Plus, it sounded like a fun video to make. This next one's kind of long, but I feel its message is important enough to read out in its entirety. Don't crucify me, but I vastly preferred the first game to the second. Now, even though I felt like the first game wasn't as hard as people said it was, I still greatly enjoyed it. The fast-paced action and platforming was second to none. Each area captured my eye as you had to think carefully about what to do next. However, I feel like Ori and the Will-O-The-Wisps was greatly lacking on the fast-paced action and platforming which made the first game so good, which is weird since they added weapons. Sure, it's present in some, and I loved it when it was there, but I just wish there was more of it, and even some more bosses. The only area where... Man, I'm tripping over all my words today. Sorry, folks. The only area which I think fully surpassed my standards was the Luma Pools. I have nothing bad to say about it, and that boss fight was amazing. I just wish there were more bosses like Quolok and more fast-paced platforming areas like it. I also feel like a lot of areas were quite boring, and made me almost quit the game. For example, the area with zero light, Moldwood Depths, just felt like a drag, and a lot of areas felt the same way to me, with a lot of repetition. However, I will say the music and animation was phenomenal, especially that last boss fight. They were cooking in those departments, so I'll give them that. I don't know, I wanted to love the game, but I just felt bored and unimpressed with a lot of it. This doesn't mean I completely hate the game, as there are a lot of areas that still had some good moments. The story of the first game almost brought me to tears, especially the ending where we realized that she was never a bad person, just a mother protecting her last child, and then she sacrificed herself. The emotion of that scene was something cinematic. Her redemption and story was easily the strongest part of the franchise in my opinion. Sure, the second game has some emotional moments like the start and end, but nothing on the level of the first one. And when Ku was struck, I didn't really feel sad since it happened so suddenly with almost no build-up. More like a what the fuck, why did they have to do that? Anyways, that's my opinion, and if you like the second game more, that's good for you. It's still a beautiful, emotional game, and I fully respect that perspective and opinion. It just didn't check all my personal boxes. I'm glad that I'm not the only one who thinks Will-O-The-Wisps fell off with the platforming despite the combat upgrades. Like I said earlier, Will-O-The-Wisps is a great game, and it's just not a good Ori game. Blind Forest established what it's meant to be an Ori game. Much like how Fallout 1 and 2 established Fallout as a turn-based post-apocalyptic RPG, that by the time of the fourth game is now a first-person post-apocalyptic action shooter with trace RPG elements and with a city builder built in. If you're wanting to make an objective analysis, you can't just state X is objectively better than X. As you did 2 sentences into this post, convince the viewer or reader why that's your standpoint. This is posted before I finished the video, obviously, but that's what this video is for. Everything I just did was to convince you that Ori and the Blind Forest is better than the sequel. This final one is quite literally an essay, posted in full as a reply chain, so I'll read off some highlights and reply to each. The combat, I think, works pretty well for Blind Forest. I like the slow progression where Sane gradually gets stronger as you level up, but there's no denying that Will-O-The-Wisp just has better combat. You get actual bosses, varying weapons, and tools to your disposal, like a faster-paced style that has a combat akin to other titles like Hollow Knight. You got it? Want a big, heavy weapon that unleashes your inner Dark Souls strength build? Done. Want a rapid-fire, long-range weapon that has side upgrades that make the weapon into either a sniper or fully automatic shotgun? Be my guest. Then there's also the shard system that replaces the skill tree, which, yes, was pretty much just yoinked from Hollow Knight, but I feel like they still did enough to make it more of a game changer than Hollow Knight. Hell, you can get a triple jump, a whole new ability from those shards. The closest you'd get to something like that in Hollow Knight is Dash Master, which only increases the distance and time before your next on-ground dash slightly. I will agree that the combat in Will of the Wisps is definitely an upgrade to Blind Forest, but I didn't find it any extra engaging personally. The shard system's nice, but like I mentioned earlier, I don't like that a lot of abilities aren't combat-focused and are more utilitarian, meaning I gotta switch them out between my combat shards for simple convenience. I will always be the number 2 hater of Will of the Wisps ending. There is just no build-up. You spend half the game trying to save Ku, then once you make your way through the Willow's End, you, at the end, now have to sacrifice yourself for the greater good of Newen and save Ku, and there's no other way, and you'll never get to see them together again. Great! I've just spent 15 hours getting put through the ringer by several chases, bosses, and tragedies, just for the game to only tell me in the end, tell me to sacrifice myself. It isn't a bad ending per se, how it got there was just severely rushed. Like maybe there could have been a line between the tombs where Sayer mentions that to save Newen, Ori would likely have to sacrifice himself to save Ku. This would give ample time to reflect and accept the fact that you won't be able to see your family ever again. Hell, you might even have had a hard choice from there, save Ku and get out of Newen, or save Newen and Ku at the cost of your own life. Gotta agree with all the points here. Story is just not that good, and the ending is bad as a result of the story not building up to it properly. It could be good. As I've said many times at this point, I don't think it's truly bad by itself. It just needs a proper building story to have it feel earned. The way it is now, Blind Forest's story is like the Great Pyramids. Each layer of stone is supported by the last. Will of the Wisps ending is like trying to support a 2-ton rock with chopsticks. It just isn't gonna work. The number one reason why I hate the idea of 100%ing and doing Blind Forest's unhinged achievement is the constant use of insta-kill bullshit that makes my blood boil. Oh, what's that? You just spent 2 hours making it to the Forlorn Ruins? Hope you feel like going through all that again. All cause one single laser from across the map touched a nanometer of your tail. Like, of course it would be hard, but man, it just feels unfair as all hell. For Will of the Wisps, it's fine. Not the best, but fine. I won't lie, Blind Forest is a difficult platformer. And because of that, I would say that if difficult platformers aren't your thing, then you most likely won't enjoy it to its fullest. I can agree that instant deaths in any game are really frustrating. Take it from me, I play a lot of Sea of Thieves. I mean, look at my other videos. And I always let out this inner sigh of pure annoyance every time I get hit in the face with a cannonball and die instantly. It can feel like what just happened was out of your control. Personally, I felt like a lot of the instant death hazards in Blind Forest were placed in such a way that getting hit by them felt more like a dough moment on my part. Some felt more unfair than others, like a lot of the crusher traps that are hard to spot. I don't need to imagine that one life difficulty makes it infinitely more frustrating to get hit by one. Like, wow, to be honest, I feel dumb just even saying that. I feel the knowledge of the map is the best way to avoid that sort of thing. Once you know the map inside and out and know your route well, avoiding them shouldn't be too difficult. Of course, who am I to talk? I haven't even tried one life difficulty personally, but I plan to start doing runs of it once I finish Will of the Wisps the second time. Maybe I could even upload or stream some of those runs, depending on how well this video does. Thank you to Oreos8A, Wendy's Burger, Lucario Legend 328, CCCJJJ2050, Jesse EMC, BristleconePINetri, Red Axolotl 1981, and WaveBlueArrow, and everyone else who took the time to reply to my post. It was a pleasure reading through all of these. Thank you so much. And with that, I'd like to wrap up this video. Feel free to comment down below what you think about both Ori games and which one you prefer. I had a lot of fun making this video and pouring my thoughts about this series into something creative. If you liked what you just watched and you'd like to see more Ori or video essays on other games, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button, which means lots. So I'll see you guys next time.